I figured I would start today with the thing that will keep me up at night for, I think, the next several months to come. And that involves something called Project 2025. And it's horrifying. I'm going to show you. This is from Politico describing what it is. But this thing is basically a conservative playbook um, that will guide the next administration. And just to give you some background here, when Trump won in 2016, that really was a surprise to pretty much everyone, including everyone who worked for Donald Trump. And what that meant is between the November election and January, when he was inaugurated about 2 months later, they didn't have everything ready to go. They didn't know who they were going to hire for key positions. They didn't know what they would do once they had power. Like, they scrambled. There's plenty of things they could whip together pretty quickly. But that's very different from saying, as soon as the election is over, and if we win, we have a set of like 1 million people we plan to hire and 1,000 executive orders we plan to have someone sign. And so this time, they're not making that mistake. They're saying, if we win, and dear God, I hope that doesn't happen, but they are saying if a Republican, probably Donald Trump, who's the presumptive nominee, but, whatever, maybe Ron DeSantis or something weird like that. But if Trump wins next year or some other Republican, we have a playbook ready to go, and it explains exactly what we're going to do as soon as the next Republican president is inaugurated. And these are mostly things that could be done even if they don't necessarily control the Senate or the House or anything like that. Now, some of you may be familiar with a version of this. It's called Project Blitz. And several years ago, like, the religious right groups all basically said, here's some model legislation that Congress can do, that state legislators can do. And it's basically a way to shove Jesus into the government. Some of it is anti-gay stuff. Some of it is, let's make sure we can say in God we trust in schools and things like that. Project 2025 is not just about religion, but there are aspects of religion that I think are worth talking about. But just to give you an overview of Project 2025, like, let me tell you some of the big things they would do. And the reason it's called 2025, Project 2025, is whoever wins the 2024 elections in November, they would be inaugurated in January of 2025. So, for example, one of the things they plan to do, this is a Republican playbook here, is they would reinstate something called Schedule F, which basically gives Republicans the power to reclassify, then fire what they call the deep state. And here's what that means in practice. Like, when a president gets elected, they have the ability to appoint like the heads of all these departments. That's the president's right. And the Senate has to confirm a lot of those positions. But if, let's say, you talk about the Department of Education or the Department of Energy, most of the people who work in that department are not political appointees. They're like random people who chose to do this for life. Doesn't matter who the president is. They are career personnel. They are people who are just dedicating their lives to doing the work of the government, which is an amazing thing. They're the ones who keep everything running between administrations. Career employees are amazing people. What Trump or the Republicans want to do is make sure that all of those career employees get reclassified in a way that would allow the next president to fire them. That should horrify everybody. I don't want a Democratic president saying, I'm going to fire everybody who works at this department because some of them might be Republican. That would be a dumb idea because, again, those employees, their political affiliation really shouldn't make a difference. It doesn't matter. You're like an underling. Just do your job. But Republicans think there's some vast conspiracy in the government. They want to get rid of everybody. And that's why they say, like, there's a deep state. It's all rigged or whatever. And by the way, once they fire all those career employees, what are they going to do? Well, they're going to replace them with political cronies who don't necessarily know how to do those jobs, it would destroy government, which again is a long-term conservative project. They don't like government. They want to destroy government. And to get around controversial Senate nominations, Project 2025 says the president should just appoint acting heads of agencies, like temporary replacements that the Senate doesn't have to confirm, which Trump did after a bunch of his other appointees had like quit later in his administration. So that would be disturbing. But okay, so that's kind of the big takeaways that people have mentioned when they talk about 2025. But let me show you a few things that are really in this playbook. And I should tell you, this is a 920-page playbook. It's huge. It's insane. Okay, let me show you a couple things here. This is from page 4. It's early in the book, okay? Very early in the book. I will blow this up so you can see it, but look at how they talk about these things, of how they're going to recreate the government. Today, the left is threatening the tax-exempt status of churches and charities that reject woke progressivism. They will soon turn to Christian schools and clubs with the same totalitarian intent. None of that is true. None of that is accurate. Like, church-state separation groups are not calling for churches to lose their tax-exempt status on the basis of their preaching. That's not what we do. The only time that even comes up is if a pastor endorses a candidate from the pulpit, like tells the congregation how to vote. Well, now they're not following IRS rules, so it would be nice if the IRS revoked their tax-exempt status, and that would be true of any nonprofit group. But as we've seen, the IRS really hasn't acted on any of those complaints. So to pretend that that is the equivalent of threatening the tax exempt status of churches and like faith-based charities, conservative charities, total lie. No one is doing that. And this idea that they're soon going to turn to Christian schools and clubs. No, we're not. We don't care about them. We want kids to be okay. We want private schools to play with private funds. Don't use taxpayer money. That's a far cry from any of this. Here's another thing from the exact same playbook here, if I could pull this up. Here we go. This is a section that talks about what they're going to do when it comes to religion. And one of them is providing robust protections for religious employers. Employers, not employees. America's religious diversity means that workplaces include people of many faiths and that many employers are faith-based. Nevertheless, the Biden administration has been hostile to people of faith, especially those with traditional beliefs about marriage, gender, and sexuality. What the hell are you talking about? The Biden administration opposes discrimination. They oppose bigotry. They don't have a problem with people of faith. You will not believe this. Joe Biden is, in fact, a person of faith. I know conservatives don't believe that, but it's true. Like the fact that Project 2025 conflates the two, like that Biden is not religious or something and that he's going after religion, it says more about the type of Christianity they espouse than anything negative with the current administration. The fact that they say like he's going after people with traditional beliefs about marriage and gender and sexuality, like, and they're saying that's hostile to people of faith. Guess what? There are plenty of people of faith who support marriage equality and don't have a problem with trans people. Like, they're just saying those are the two same things. Faith, people who are bigots. Like, that's, again, that they're telling on themselves right there. But again, they're not, the Biden administration is not going after people of faith. What they're saying is if there are laws in place that say you can't discriminate against gay couples, well, then the government shouldn't be rewarding your job. For example, if there is a foster care agency or an adoption agency, good for them. I'm glad they're doing that sort of work. But if it's a faith-based foster care agency or adoption agency, and they receive federal funding to do the work that they do, then they should not be allowed to discriminate against which couples they work with or which parents they work with on the basis of their religion. All of us know if you gave money to a Christian organization, federal money, federal taxpayer money, and the organization said, well, we don't work with Black couples or Jewish couples. Actually, let me take back Jewish one for a second. But if they said we don't work with people on the basis of race, I think everyone would rightfully say that's completely inappropriate. Of course, they can't do that. And yet, we have seen Christian owned businesses that take in federal funds say, we don't want to work with Jewish couples. We don't want to work with gay couples. And right now, they're allowed to do that. But criticizing that is not the same as criticizing faith. That should be obvious to everyone. Here's another thing they plan to do. They want to go after education as well. And let me show you what they're trying to do on this front. Here is another thing. Let me explain what this one is talking about for a second. They want to basically attack the education system because right now, the Project 2025 is calling for mandatory religious exemptions from accreditation standards and criteria for public schools. So basically, what that means is any religious private school or university that fails to meet accreditation standards, meaning they're not really teaching kids what they need to be teaching kids for them to say, we gave this kid a degree in history. Well, in order to make that count, that kid needs to be learning history. And that's what accreditation means. And religious schools are saying we want an exemption from those standards. So look at what this says. We want to protect faith-based institutions by prohibiting accreditation agencies from requiring standards and criteria that undermine the religious beliefs of or require policies or conduct that conflict with the religious mission or religious beliefs of the institution and intruding on the governance of colleges and universities controlled by religious organization. Here's what that means in practice. If you're a private Christian university and you're, let's say, giving a degree in psychology or something like that, well, guess what? There are aspects of psychology that deal with gender and sexuality. And if you're not teaching that, or you're teaching it incorrectly by lying about gay people or trans people, then an accreditation agency can say, well, you can't legitimately say you're giving a history degree or a psychology degree or anything like that. There are some standards. And what this is saying is we need to make sure religious institutions can just get away from all that. The government has no right to tell us our degrees are worthless or something like that. Just a horrible idea. The document also says that no public institution, public schools, public colleges, they cannot require teachers or professors to use a trans person's pronouns if it goes against the teacher's religious beliefs, which is basically a way to say, I get to be a bigot if I'm religious and you can't stop me. Sex discrimination protections get attacked as well. So here's an example of that. There's something called Title IX. It's a federal law that basically prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex. Now, the Obama administration actually allowed colleges to say, listen, we are Christian colleges and we do discriminate on the basis of sex because, women belong in the kitchen or whatever it is that they believe. The Obama administration said, okay, you're allowed to get an exemption to the rule, but all the schools that get the exemption, we are going to put you on a list so people know that you are exempt from the rules. That's just basic transparency. Like, okay, fine. If you don't want to follow the rules, we're at least going to let people know you're not following the rules. Well, guess what Project 2025 says? When it comes to that stuff, check this out. They say we want to eliminate the list of shame. In 2016, the Obama administration published on the Department of Education's website a list of colleges that had applied for the exemption. This list of shame of faith-based colleges, as it came to be known, it was not known as that, has since been archived on the Education Department's website, still publicly available. The president should issue an executive order removing the archived list and preventing such a list from being published in the future. So what does that mean? That means Christian colleges want to make sure they can discriminate and that the public doesn't know about it. Because if they did, it would make those schools look really friggin' bad. Like, that's what these people are trying to do. They want to break the rules, they want to make life worse for students, and they don't want anyone knowing that they're doing that. Here's another thing that they want to do here. Because again, I need to stress a lot of government funds go to faith based organizations that often do secular things. And there's not anything wrong with that as long as they're playing by the rules and doing secular work. But check this one out. We want to protect faith based grant recipients from religious liberty violations and maintain a biblically based social science reinforced definition of marriage and family, which is a very long way of saying, hey, we might be bigots, but we still want your money, right? That's all that's saying. It basically means if these groups oppose marriage equality or trans identities, all these groups still want access to that money. And I think the funniest thing about this that made me laugh out loud, check out this thing at the very end here. Despite recent congressional bills like the Respect for Marriage Act that redefine marriage to be the union between any two individuals, these particular religious program grants should be available to faith-based recipients who affirm that marriage, wait for it, is between not just any two adults, but one man and one unrelated woman. And that makes me laugh because you just know they used to say marriage is between one man and one woman. And then someone at one of these Christian groups piped up and said, hey, we have a little problem here between the one man and one woman thing, and it's called the South. And we need to include one extra word right in the middle there. Let's say unrelated. Just stick that thing in there. And now we're on the right track. Just ridiculous. What else is in this horrible thing? Oh, this is one I was not expecting. I have not heard Christian groups making this argument, but here it is. Congress should encourage communal rest by amending the Fair Labor Standards Act to require that workers be paid time and a half for hours worked on the Sabbath. First of all, if you want to encourage communal rest, I'm all for a 4-day work week. That sounds like a wonderful idea. That's not what they're talking about. And they also want workers to be paid like time and a half, overtime pay, which also great idea for working on the Sabbath, which is weird because there are some companies that want to be open on the Sabbath. And what they're saying here, that day would default to Sunday, except unless you have a different Sabbath. But, we're going to use the Christian version of it as default. And houses of worship and employers legally required to work around the clock would be exempt, as would workers otherwise exempt from overtime. Yeah. Here's what they're trying to do. This is not the workers' right platform that you might think at first sight. This is. What they're trying to do is force companies to just shut down on Sundays so that people can go to church. Because these companies, according to this argument, if they kept the job open on Sundays and people had to work on Sundays, and then these companies had to pay those employees time and a half, well, that's a lot of extra money. What are the employers going to do if that became a law of some sort? Well, they might just all have to close on Sunday. And hey, guess what? That means it's more time for employees to go to church. So this is not about employees' rights. This is about using the government to pressure companies to shut down so people can go to church. How messed up is that? Like, they've really thought through this. There's one more thing I wanted to show you all from this particular thing. Oh, I should say there are multiple references to this country's supposed Judeo-Christian tradition, quote, stretching back to Genesis. That's in the text. And it talks about God-given rights. But there are no mentions of non-Christian religious beliefs. The Freedom from Religion Foundation Action Fund actually said the only mentions of Islam in all 920 pages of this document, they are references to terrorism and concerns about the Islamic Republic of Iran's nuclear capabilities. And the document also says religious devotion and spirituality are the greatest sources of happiness around the world. Just like that. It's a fact. No citations given whatsoever. Other things in this document. There are policy changes that would open the door to religious organizations getting loans from the Small Business Administration. It would endorse religious pharmacists who don't want to give birth control to patients. It supports religious bigots with taxpayer dollars, which I mentioned. It gives faith based anti vaxxers a way to spread diseases in the name of Jesus. That's in here as well. Here's the last thing I'll mention here. There's a section of the document written by Roger Severino, who is a very famous anti-LGBTQ activist, where he talks about why the CDC precautions during COVID to prevent, mass gatherings, everything had to get shut down during COVID because no one really knew what was going on. We didn't want the virus to spread. So they said, look, large gatherings are no good. Don't do it. And then a lot of churches complained because they were selfish. And they said, well, our church will still meet and we'll meet in person and masks are optional. And they did all this stuff that just spread the virus even more. Well, Roger Severino has a section in here where he talks about what the government should do once the Republicans take over the CDC. And check this out, because this is frightening. Let me make sure. There we go. Check this out. The CDC can and should make assessments as to the health costs and benefits of health interventions, but it has limited to no capacity to measure the social costs or benefits they may entail. For example, check this out. This is messed up. How much risk mitigation is worth the price of shutting down churches on the holiest day of the Christian calendar and far beyond, as happened in 2020? What is the proper balance of lives saved versus souls saved? The CDC has no business making such inherently political and often constitutional assessments and should be required by law to stay in its lane. What he's referring to is Easter occurred early during the pandemic in 2020, and churches couldn't meet in person. And that's like their biggest fundraising day of the year. And what Severino is basically saying here is, who cares if lives are saved? We're trying to save something we just made up in our heads, and that should count even more than the death of all the old people in your lives. And the CDC, whose job is to care about physical health and like all that sort of stuff, well, they have if my religious beliefs are more important than whatever the CDC says. Just think of how insane that logic is. Whatever your religious beliefs are, they supersede what experts in epidemiology, all the doctors who spend their lives thinking about this stuff, researching this stuff. Severino says, doesn't matter because, I don't know, religious people wanted to meet in person, so you don't get to tell us no. The next time there's a pandemic, these churches are still going to meet and they will spread the virus because they are so selfish. They do not care about what happens as a result of their gathering. That's the problem. It's utter selfishness. We knew that when COVID occurred and they were trying to push for this stuff. And now they want to codify it into law, which is horrible. By the way, COVID has taken the lives of an estimated 6.7 million people across the globe so far. And this guy is saying that he thought the CDC's policy of, hey, try not to kill people, that was anti-Christian rather than pro-health. And so any science-based recommendations just tossed out the window if this project goes into effect. Like, bottom line is, Project 2025, it's this Christian nationalist wish list that elevates white evangelical bigotry at the expense of everyone else. It's written and it's published right now to convince the Republican base that they need to fall in line and vote for whoever the GOP nominee is, even if it's Donald Trump, even if some Republicans are feeling squishy about him, and even if he's ultimately convicted of his crimes. This document is saying none of that matters. This is what we're going to do no matter who the Republican figurehead is in office. So vote for Republicans is what they're trying to get at. By the way, they have a $22 million budget to work with. They have an advisory board full of right-wing organizations with this long history of hurting marginalized groups, spreading lies about American history, filing lawsuits to attack civil rights protections. They're trying to ban books. This is the future that awaits us if Republicans win the next election. And it doesn't matter who the president would be. This is what Republicans plan to do. This is not fear mongering. They are literally telling us all their plans in writing more than a year in advance. Think about that. It's a scary document.